Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
We can't be lazy and we can't be worthy. It's not enough to say we're somehow better because we're doing the issues that the others aren't. We have to do it well, and the test of that is, can I get your attention? Can I make you feel? Can I make you care? And I think there's no better example than Mr. Sainath's book, India's Last Heroes. It's an extraordinary set of stories about foot soldiers of the freedom movement. Now, when you hear that, you may think, oh, it'll be an academic tome. It's actually delightful little vignettes where you really feel you know the people, in particular the women. So I think what we have to do is we can't be sanctimonious and preachy with our audience and lecture to them and say, oh, you are baking banana bread and you don't care about the migrant workers. How dare you, you shallow urban Indian middle class? That's not going to work. It's on you to find a way to tell that story.
Writer and columnist Bachi Karkaria speaks to a panel of authors and journalists, P. Sainath, Sashi Kumar, and Barkha Dutt about the human interest story, the grassroots reportage, and their take on their own profession, which is meant to hold a mirror up to society. Is this mirror turning into a sycophant? Are the cracks irreparable? Is the whole enterprise a failing one? The panel offers its views. This episode of BIC Talks is an adaptation from Bangalore Literature Festival 2022.
Good evening. Following a sex panel is always a very hard act to follow. Pun unintended. But
Yes, Bachi Karkaria,
it has given me a chance to say what Sainath never likes me to say, that he's the man who made poverty sexy. He really did bring it to the front page. He kind of made it into as gripping and as readable a story as any other. So I'm very glad to have him. Sashi is, of course, training journalists, and I'm really going to ask him how he teaches journalists or budding journalists to navigate this terrible media space that we find ourselves in. And Barkha, I don't know what I can ask Barkha. So I'm just hoping Barkha will carry this whole thing along with her usual mojo, right? Okay. So, when we started, which was ages ago, the human interest story was something that all editors paid great lip service to. And yet, when you produced that story, it was always reduced to the bottom of the page, to anchor, as if it was some exotic creature of journalism. Whereas the humans of anyone, not just of COVID, humans are what the media is all about. So holding this mirror to society is what journalism should be doing as a matter of course. But it doesn't happen. And it's happening even less. Because when you hold a mirror to society, you have to show up what is bad. And you cannot do good these days because the good and the great are refusing to let us talk about the bad. So I hope that in the course of this discussion, we will be able to find some way out of this morass. So let me start with you, Barkha. You also spoke about the fact that, doing a good story. What does it take to do a good story?
Before that, Bachi, we should have started with the stalwarts on the stage and not with the sort of youngest wannabe, not so young anymore at 50, but still. One of the things that I was forced to confront in the last 2 years of COVID was my own bias about what's an important story. So before we come to what's a good story, I just want to confess that for many years, if I had been told to do a news feature, a human story, I would have regarded it as what is called soft news, right? This is something that comes in the middle or the sort of lower totem pole. I can't prove myself. I can't grow. I can't build myself on the back of human interest stories. This is how we all thought. This is how newsroom hierarchies, said and unsaid, right, have been constructed in India over years. And it isn't just in television. I think it's as true for newspapers, as true for magazines, that journalists have ended up doing journalism for other journalists instead of for people. And it was only when I kind of set out on this kind of 2-year tryst with my COVID reporting And 1 hour away from where I live, I actually ended up in a village. My book opens with this chapter called The Village with Yellow Water. And that is the time when we were all being exhorted to wash our hands. And I ended up in this village where daily wage workers, of course, because of the lockdown, had no work. There were factories all around which had contaminated the underground water. And without work, they were having to buy drinking water because the supply was not potable. And then the women dragged me to the village tap and showed me that they can't wash their hands because when they wash their hands, their skin breaks into an immediate rash because of the high level of chemical sort of poison, as it were, or toxins in the water. And I thought to myself, I have been a journalist for 25 years almost. This place is 1 hour away from where I live. And it was under my nose and I didn't do the story because in my mind, it wasn't my idea of an important story. So I think before we discuss what's a story well told, we have to challenge the hierarchies that we have all been trained in.
But tell me, both of you, did you really have to break away from big mainstream media to be able to do these stories? Yes. You, Sainath, you also, long before.
I don't want to hog the mic, so I'll just quickly say that I see myself as a child of television. I don't diss the medium per se. The medium is visual storytelling is capable of magic. But the way television became was something where I had quite literally lost my mojo. I had got swept up in the staleness of what I was doing day after day. It had become a talking heads factory. There is space for the interview. There is space for the discussion program. But even the issues you choose have to reflect people. And I just felt like it was a now or never thing for me. I mean, I either was going to have to resign myself to a kind of acceptance that this was going to be an average at best and a really dangerous at worst sort of content environment that I was in, or I had to step away and try to do something that I believed in. And I'm trying. And I don't think it's possible anymore in mainstream Indian TV for many reasons that we can get into later.
And yeah, with hindsight, it was really the best thing that you could have done.
In hindsight.
Considering, yeah. But Sainath, you broke away from, how long ago were you in mainstream media?
You know, Bachi, I don't know that I broke away from something. I think that with hyper-commercialization and corporatization, the media have broken away from journalism. They are two different entities. Say, for instance, not a single newspaper in the country has a full-time labor correspondent. Yeah? Not when I joined UNI in 1980, every newspaper had a labor correspondent. Now, and then some newspapers now claim they have an agriculture correspondent. The agriculture correspondent is someone who largely covers the agriculture ministry and agribusiness, and sometimes just the agriculture minister, like when Mr. Pawar was the minister. Yeah. So you do not, you're saying 60%, you're making a declaration that 60 or 70% of the population do not make news, right? Except at election time, right? So I don't know that I broke away from, I think that what I'm doing is very old-fashioned. It's storytelling as journalism.
Sashi, you tell us, because you are really training journalists. Now, how are journalists to negotiate increasingly this very, very skewed, hierarchy? Their bosses were earlier insensitive. Today, the few who were sensitized to all this are under pressure from managements. So, I mean, how easy is it to be a journalist these days, basically?
I think this is a very exciting time to be a journalist, provided you're willing to throw all that you've seen before you out of the window. And that's precisely what the millennial journalist wants to do. First of all, this silo of print, television, and all that is out of the window.
Yeah.
The new journalist is digital. The cell phone is a kind of prosthetic arm, if you like, extension of her arm. They think digitally, they understand the world digitally, they communicate digitally. And therefore, it's an entire paradigm shift. So when we speak about mainstream journalism, what is mainstream journalism? English journalism, regional Indian language journalism, or journalism. So all of this mainstream English journalism is city-centric, is town-centric. Rural India, Sainath's India doesn't exist for them. It existed when Sainath wrote a column, and when he left, it doesn't exist. I mean, it's as bad as that.
Shashi, what makes a mainstream journalism? By the way, in the research studies, national daily is any daily that has an edition coming out of Delhi.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's a very...
The rest of us are anti-national.
Yeah, it's a very Delhi-centric or a town-centric, city-centric phenomenon. But what's happening out there is there are hundreds and thousands of things happening. Now, even in the Indian language press, what I mean media, what you call the long tail, in digital terms, the tail, I think, is beginning to wag the dog, which is why your mainstream television news channels are looking like a bore on NewsHour. Channel after channel gives you more and more of the same guests, the same invitees, appearing at the same time, and they are all calling it live. Unless they have multiple personalities, I don't know how they can all be there at the same time. I mean, they are lying. And, the idea of public interest has deteriorated to what interests the public. There's a solid difference between the two. Public interest is a very different thing from what interests the public. Having said that, you must say things interestingly. Otherwise, public interest can't be communicated. That's very important.
So, Sashi, I'm glad you said this, because public interest and what interests the public. And there I might join issue with you, because we keep thinking that what interests the public is just... We'll come back to that story. When I was doing the Times of India and Bombay Times and all that, and I went to a workshop of UNICEF, and they wanted to be trained into how to deal with the media, which they said was only interested in Diana Hayden's legs. And I said, no, NGOs are really dealing with the kind of stuff that we as editors want in our paper, because it's about the human struggle, it's about adversity, but it has to be a story well told. If you tell me we have gone and dug 50 bore wells, we'll say, please get buried and drowned in that boredom of your bore wells. And journalists are not going to make that effort to go. You have to be able to package the story so that the media can take it up. But you had a story about Diana Hayden, so tell us that.
No, I'd much rather... It was not about Diana Hayden.
But it was a story.
It was in the 93-94 period when I was doing all those stories with the Times of India. I got called in those days by Star News. You remember? Before there was a NDTV as a separate channel. So they called me on... that was the era of Miss World and Miss Universe. And one of those things, I got called for a comment, and all the girls who were in that assembly line, were trained to say, we want to do the same things as Mother Teresa. So the anchor asked me, I don't even remember who the guy was, but he asked me, isn't that noble? They want to do the same things as Mother Teresa. I said, we've got to move on this quickly, because the only way they're going to do the same things as Mother Teresa is for Mother Teresa to enter a beauty contest. And she'd better hurry up, time's running out.
So actually, Barkha, maybe you might really like to talk about, that ultimately it has to be a story well told. And, how is it that journalists should go about, okay, there's style and all that. But I think basically there's a lot of hard work to be able to tell a story well told.
So I think there's no excuse for poor storytelling. You have to at least try to tell a good story. It's a craft. It is a craft. And that is why you have people like Shashi who actually train, how to sort of acquire skills of that craft. And I'll give you a small example. In the first wave of COVID, when I was sort of following what was happening with workers, daily wage workers who were walking back home, I could tell you to this audience that 100 million migrant workers of India were impacted by the first wave, and chances are that you'll register that figure. It's a colossal figure, but you will not really feel anything. But if I told you, as I did, the story of a man called Mukesh Mandal, who was a house painter, who ran out of money, ran out of work, and then decided to sell the only asset he had, which was his phone. He sold it for 2,000 rupees. With 500 rupees, he bought a table fan. With another 500 rupees, he bought some wheat and rice and dal. He brought it home to his wife Poonam and his 3 children, and he gave her the remaining 1,000 rupees. Poonam was delighted. She thought, well, at least the next couple of weeks, my children won't go hungry. She went to sleep easy that night. The next morning, Mukesh asked Poonam if he could borrow her dupatta. And Poonam gave it to him. She didn't know what it was for. He went and tied it around the bamboo pole of their one-room tenement and took his own life. Now, if I tell you this story, maybe you're willing to hear about the 100 million people. But if I just give you that dry statistic, I can bet you'll register it somewhere, but you'll probably be looking at your phone and what's on Instagram. So the point is, we can't be lazy and we can't be worthy. It's not enough to say we're somehow better because we're doing the issues that the others aren't. We have to do it well, and the test of that is, can I get your attention? Can I make you feel? Can I make you care? And I think there's no better example than Mr. Sainath's book, India's Last Heroes. It's an extraordinary set of stories about foot soldiers of the freedom movement. Now, when you hear that, you may think, oh, it'll be an academic tome. It's actually delightful little vignettes where you really feel you know the people, in particular the women. So I think what we have to do is, we can't be sanctimonious and preachy with our audience and lecture to them and say, oh, you are baking banana bread and you don't care about the migrant workers. How dare you, you shallow urban Indian middle class? That's not going to work. It's on you to find a way to tell that story.
I think that's an important thing she touched on, that you can't be prescriptive,
Yes.
All of us are prescriptive. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. The thing is that younger people are discovering newer ways of exploring their environment and talking about the issues that matter. And the issues that matter to them are issues that should matter to us as well. I mean, they do in most cases. So this whole thing about, unfortunately, the news are on television, which is a dominant style that we have, is all about prescriptive.
Yes.
Sit, stand, walk. Short of saying eat, they say everything else, So that pattern has to change, and that pattern is changing. It's changed already. We are pretending this 0.1% that watches all of this primetime news hour on all the private channels is the determining factor. It's not. And the statistics...
TRPs are even less so.
Woefully small statistics. In rural India, at least in different parts of India, in different languages, people are seeing different. They're all watching on their mobile phones. They know what's happening out there, and I don't think we are aware of that. And unless we are aware of that, and also, I mean, at the risk of being a little different, we must also move out of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Most stories on what you think human interest will start like this. Ashok got up in the morning, not knowing what to do. Yeah. Or Rita began her walk again, 6 miles to fetch wood. One is fed up of hearing this again and again and again. The cliches. You have to get out of this. And I think younger people have a way about handling that. And one has to discover that. We have to keep rediscovering, redefining, reinventing what, in inverted commas, journalism is all about.
Sorry.
When Barkha was doing that story, there's also a large political context on which the media have failed. I'm making a distinction between journalists and media. Media is the institutional thing. If you look at what happened at that time, they didn't question it when we were writing about the migrants, and they didn't question the fact that the Attorney General of this country stood up in the Supreme Court on March 31 and gave the Supreme Court an affidavit saying, as of 11:30 a.m. this morning, there is not a single migrant on the highway. 2 months later, the railways issue a proud statement saying we shipped 91 lakh people in 26 days. That political context of the sheer one world of lying going on at one end, and at the other end this. But there's more about the political context and what's happened in the last 2 years, which I'll come back to when Bachi allows me.
No, since you mentioned this thing about the political context, I want to bring in the mantra which came in with the second wave of feminism, and even earlier with student movements, that the personal is the political. And I think what has been happening with you, Barkha, with you, is that I think you're really getting to the personal through the political, and really now not seeing the distinction. For instance, a most direct example of that is the fact of how you used your father's passing to then, kind of, as you said, you became the story. You had been living and breathing COVID for the past year, and suddenly you became the story. And I will not say that because it affected your father, you became more of a reporter, because you had already proved that. So this whole business of getting to the political through the personal, Sainath, you have been doing that far longer in your People's Archive of Rural India, much before this whole business of we've discovered migrant workers.
Yeah, but by the way, I want to point out to you, in connection with what Sashi correctly pointed out, in the People's Archive of Rural India, we have the youngest workforce of any publication or any journal. Our average filmmaker's age is 25.
Yeah.
And yeah. So the thing, but I want to get this political context very clear, because giant processes have been going on in which we have to find a place and act and dance with that tune. Look, on March 24th, 8 p.m., the Prime Minister gave the country, 1.4 billion people, 4 hours to shut down their lives. Yeah. But he then did something next, which I praised. I mean, I actually said, this is great. They listed the essential services which were exempted from the lockdown, and for the first time that I am aware of, the media were included in it.
Yes.
So I thought this was something really good. No previous government had done it. Now, by the way, one of the meaning of essential service is that your job is protected. And in the next 2 years, the media have laid off more than 3,000 journalists and maybe 10 to 15,000 non-journalist media workers. Okay. Now, because media have converted journalism, when the kind of corporatization we've seen, makes journalism one more revenue stream. And it has to support the other revenue streams of the corporate owners. So this is something we're not able to. One other little anecdote I want to tell you. It'll tell you what is the state of press freedom in my experience in this country. In 2021, Reporters Sans Frontières, the Reporters Without Borders in Paris, came out with the World Press Freedom Index, where it ranked India 142 out of 178 countries. The government of India was incensed, so incensed that the Union Cabinet Secretary, simply the most important bureaucrat in the country, a man who takes his orders only from one person, though in the present dispensation, 1.5, and he wrote, he directed the Information and Broadcasting Ministry to set up an index monitoring cell to rebut this conspiracy against India. They set up a big committee full of top-level bureaucrats and middle-level bureaucrats, and found that, suddenly that it might be an idea when you're having a committee on press freedom to include a journalist as well. Yeah? So it occurred to them somewhat late, and they put 2 of us, myself and another very famous gentleman who, I can't believe that a TV anchor can be silent, but he did say a word in both meetings that he attended. After that, he said he was terribly busy and bowed out. But I made my acceptance conditional. I said, I'm not interested in what the Goras are ranking you. If I rank you, you'll be much lower than 142. I said, I am interested if you will promise me that we will look at the state of Indian journalism from the eyes of the Indian journalist. By the way, have you known that 720 journalists till August this year, 720 journalists have died of COVID. Most of them stringers earning 4,000, 5,000, whose families are in debt of 5 to 6 lakhs because of the bloody hospitalization trauma that they've suffered. And Anyway, I said, if you will make it a commission, this thing on press freedom, the chairman of the committee, a very high-ranking officer, said, absolutely, this is a committee on press freedom. And in case anyone denies this, by the way, I recorded the Zoom at my end. So it's all there on record. Then we had meetings, subgroups. In fact, it was a very learning experience. We figured out, do you know how many laws there are in this country affecting media? 54. To which Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah added another 6 by prosecuting us under Epidemics Diseases Act. Yeah. I mean, this sort of thing went on. So you can say 60 laws are affecting media. So I participated. They were very, very happy with my participation. And whatever I said, the chairman said, very important point, must be noted. This is standard practice in a bureaucratic dance, okay? At the end, they created a draft report, significant for the absence of the word draft, because it was going to be, and to get it past me, the first paragraph on the first page praises me to the skies for my services given to the thing, and not a word I had said appears in that report. So I wrote a dissent note. And I said, they've said things like security forces are working round heroically to protect journalists in Kashmir. I said, maybe we should call a couple of journalists from Kashmir to tell us how protected they feel. And anyway, I write this note, high-powered committee established at the behest of the Union Cabinet Secretary disappears overnight. It disappears overnight. When I send the note 3 times, the email ID disappears. RTI is done by the best RTI journalist in this country, have confirmed the existence of a committee, says yes, it met so many times, and questions number 2 to 9 that poor Shamlal has asked, they say, not our department. So it's not answered. My friends think I'm being ungrateful. I mean, that's the kind of friends I have. They say that, damn it, at least you ought to be grateful. They disappeared the report, not the journalist.
It's not 142, it's 150 now in 2020. In 2022, just to update the record, we are 150 out of 180 nations in the world press in a freedom index. Having said that, I think to be even-handed, I also find that a faulty report, because a country like UAE can't be better than us. There are many countries where there's no concept of press freedom, which rank above us. So I think there is something to argue about the veracity of that ranking. But I think the ranking includes the threats that journalists face. And when you factor that in, yes, this 150, it makes sense, because in other countries, they don't face any threat because nobody reports anything which is, against those who rule. In the Gulf countries, for instance, other countries.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a reason.
Yeah, because if you
and
do...
many of them are also, here people are being booked. What does Siddiq Kapan do? UAPA, Sedition Act, any number of acts, in acts. So I think the important thing about journalism today is journalism is news. Journalists are news because they are at the receiving end. That on the one side. On the other hand, they are a shame to the profession of journalism, because they lay themselves prostrate before those in power. Even before they're asked to, they become propaganda arms, they become amplification for those in power. And they become probably worse than what those in power want them to do. So this is the crisis of
Shashi is absolutely right. You've fallen to 150. As I said, I would have ranked them lower. But apart from that fact, and it's also true that many countries don't have the concept at all, but 100 FIRs in the last 48 months, in the last 30 months, 100 FIRs against journalists. One of them against a man who has since committed suicide, Zubair Ahmed in the Andamans, another Zubair Ahmed, who was arrested for tweeting the question. A family had been arrested and quarantined, not arrested, a family had been quarantined for talking on the phone to COVID-affected relatives. So he asked, what is the purpose of this? And he is arrested the next day by the Andaman administrator. So, I mean, it's becoming very, very difficult. But if you do, the lesson I always teach my students, including those in Shashi's ACJ, if you do challenging journalism, you will be challenged. You know, don't whine too much about it. You will be challenged.
If I may say so, you're talking about a very, very overt form of threat. But threat perception has acquired even more sinister meaning because now there's a very covert kind of threat. So even without saying anything directly, you are under threat. I mean, as a columnist, I am told, no number one, no number two, oh no ED, oh no IT. And I joke, I say my bandwidth is increasing. So, and then you'll find journalists will start doing self-censorship and the managements will say, oh, but we didn't say anything, or the government will say that. Yeah. And this whole point, I mean, it's become a cliche now that at the emergency, it was, you were told, Advani said,
crawl.
Ben, you chose to crawl. But it's happening every day. This Godi media has become into some, correct.
I mean, look at the context. For instance, we just had an international film festival in Goa where the chairman of the jury you invited spoke about a particular film, his views on the film, and the blowback, not the government, of course, but the blowback from the social media, from orchestrated social media. That's one factor we haven't really discussed. Yeah. So journalists have to fight a formal government. They have to fight their own brethren who are kind of Trojan horse in the whole situation, And then they have to fight the social media, or what you call the troll armies.
Yes.
And so so you're asking me what do you train journalists? We have to train them to dodge bullets now, dodge all of these. That is a primary, crisis we are in.
And can I just add a line about social media? Younger people, so many young people, in particular women that I know and have worked with, either they've gone off some of these social media platforms because they just can't deal with the violence of the virtual lynch mobs, or more worryingly, people have started modifying what they say or what they don't say because they imagine a dominant narrative and they think if we say this, we will get approval. If we say this, they'll come after us.
So you're tailoring it to a social media, I imagine.
So let us be very clear that this is a way to intimidate and interfere with our brain. It is actually mind control. We cannot be cavalier about how serious the impact. There are people like us, we're older, we've been there. Like I used to get very impacted. I've grown a thick skin now. But there are a lot of people who say, why should we grow this thick skin? Why should we take this abuse? Why should we be called prostitutes? Why should women in particular, the language is sexualized, it's violent, there are rape threats. I mean, you cannot expect human beings to be completely untouched by this.
And when alternative voices speak up there, the way they're dealt with.
That's what I'm saying, that there's an imagined, they'll come after us. And then
And this in an ecology where in all J schools in India, 60 to 70% of students will be women. In other words, they are the ones who, maybe all of them don't enter the workforce.
Yeah.
But in that situation, you still have this, discrimination, not just, this violence against women.
Yeah.
At the mental level, this is terrible.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that one beautiful poster that just disappeared, I don't know who did what to the author, one which I liked very much and I want to share with you. It said, when the billionaires list came out in Forbes, etc., this poster said, 2 Gujaratis are working extremely hard to transfer the wealth and resources of this country to 2 Gujaratis.
And I think on that note, we must end. And thank you very much. It's been very good, yeah.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you like what we do, please share it with your friends and family. You can also leave us a review or rating on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. Do follow us on Instagram for updates on all our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.